Hey guys, tonight we wake up in a one-room timber cottage somewhere in 14th century England, just before dawn, with your entire body pretending it's already halfway to the grave. The wooden beams overhead groan with every gust of wind. Your straw mattress has fermented into a damp compost heap, and the rooster outside is screaming like a small, feathered demon. You're a yeoman archer, a free landholder, technically, but don't let that title trick you into thinking this life has perks. You're not noble enough to avoid taxes, and not poor enough to be pitied. You live in that delightful middle space where both kings and cows expect things from you. You roll out of bed and instantly regret it. The cold slaps you harder than the local magistrate, and your spine sounds like a cart rolling over loose gravel. You squint at the rising sun, wondering if it's worth crawling back into bed and pretending you've died. Spoiler: the bed smells worse than death. Someone possibly you tracked sheep dung into the corner last night, and now it's crusted onto your only tunic like an embroidered badge of peasantry. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle toward the hearth, which contains more ashes than fire. There's a pot of yesterday's porridge still hanging above it, congealed, gray, and swaying slightly as if it has opinions. You scrape some off with a wooden spoon that was also your great-grandfather's toothbrush. The porridge tastes like warm sadness. Your house is shared with your spouse, children, and several highly judgmental chickens. The chickens are winning the fight for floor space. One of them stares at you while laying an egg in your boot. You nod. It's her boot now. Outside, your plot of land you're holding is roughly the size of two rugs placed slightly apart, but it's yours. And that means taxes. A lot of taxes. You owe labor to your lord, service to your king, tithes to the church, and patience to every neighbor who insists their cow is smarter than yours. Spoiler: all cows are equally dumb. You're expected to practice archery every Sunday, by royal decree, not for fun. Of course, archery is war prep, and war never asks politely. In fact, you'll soon learn that you exist mostly to fling arrows at men you've never met, under weather conditions that would cancel modern marathons. Historians still argue whether the yeoman class was the backbone of English independence or just a conveniently taxable demographic. Either way, your spine feels like it's collapsing under history's weight. Your children, barefoot and half-dressed, run around screaming with the energy of feral squirrels. One of them has a cold. All of them have fleas. You contemplate sending them to the village school. But remember that school is a church with a chalkboard and a man who smells like mold. You gulp down ale for breakfast because the water might kill you. The ale might too, but it does so more slowly and with fewer worms. Your bow hangs above the door. It's taller than you, lovingly warped from yew wood, and looks more like a torture device than a weapon. You run your fingers across its frame and feel the faint sting of splinters and past regrets. You are not just an archer. You are a professional shoulder injury with a tax bill. And so begins another glorious day in the life of a medieval yeoman. You stretch. Something pops. Probably important. You step outside and immediately remember that fresh air is mostly a rumor. The yeoman morning routine begins with inhaling a cocktail of mud, smoke, and the unmistakable tang of manure. Your neighbors are already awake. In fact, they've probably been awake since the 1300s. One is busy dumping a bucket of suspiciously brown liquid into the street. You nod good morning. He nods back, then dumps another bucket. Your home is wedged between a cart path and a turnip field, which means you're never more than 6 feet away from something rotten. You don't mind. Really? You've grown fond of the smell. It's like family persistent, occasionally comforting, and almost always disappointing. You trudge to the edge of your plot. There stands your tiny garden, a miracle of subsistence farming and lowered expectations. A few onions, some cabbage, one very nervous-looking rabbit that hasn't yet realized it's Christmas dinner. You dig around with a wooden spade cracked, handmade, and inherited from a cousin who died of something medieval. Possibly everything. Your bed, by the way, wasn't actually built for sleeping. More like collapsing. It's stuffed with straw that absorbs moisture, the way rumors absorb truth completely and without remorse. The straw is home to things with legs. Sometimes they bite you. Sometimes they whisper. One night, you're pretty sure the straw coughed. Sleeping arrangements are cozy. If by cozy, you mean elbowing your spouse every time you breathe. If you have children, congratulations, they sleep on a pallet by the fire, where embers sometimes pop and ignite a sibling. That's just warmth in medieval parenting. The roof leaks. Always. It leaks when it rains. It leaks when it doesn't rain. Historians still argue whether medieval thatching techniques were ingenious insulation or just an elaborate prank by carpenters. Either way, you wake up damp. Even your dreams are moist. There's no privacy. Your entire domestic life plays out in one room. Cooking, sleeping, arguing, apologizing, sulking, all within arm's reach. Doors are for nobles. You use curtains, and even then, only if the goat isn't chewing them. Getting dressed is fast. You own one outfit. It's wool, scratchy, gray, perpetually damp. It smells like it's preparing for retirement. Your undergarments, if you have any, resemble medieval. Origami folded so many times that no one's really sure which part goes where. You sit on a wooden bench, sip ale from a clay mug, and admire the craftsmanship of your bow. The longbow is your pride, your status symbol, and your insurance policy. You carved it with a kind of dedication, usually reserved for saints or sourdough starters. Every yeoman worth his taxes knows how to string a bow and let it sing. Archery practice is mandatory, not because the king loves sports, but because he really hates France. You're expected to be war-ready at all times. The only break you get is when your fingers start bleeding. Even then, someone probably tells you to walk it off. You try to ignore the pain in your back, the ache in your knees, and the vague suspicion that your left foot is slowly turning into wood. But hey, you're free. Mostly, legally, spiritually. You're still owned by weather, taxes, and the whims of every passing lord. You glance over at your neighbor's house. His goat is standing on the roof again. No one knows how it gets up there. The goat refuses to explain. That goat pays no rent and lives better than most serfs. Your wife, if you have one, is already up to her elbows in dough and disappointment. She's cooking pottage. Again, the same dish you had yesterday, the day before, and on your wedding night. It's not bad. It's not good either. It's present. And that's your morning. Welcome to the middle class of the Middle Ages sore, slightly damp, and constantly preparing for battle. You feel it. That little pressure in your lower belly. The warning knock of nature's call. And this is where your day takes a sharp left turn into something you'd rather not talk about. But we must, because this is the Middle Ages, and the concept of plumbing is still a distant dream. So, where do you go to relieve yourself? Well, the polite answer is outside. The honest answer is everywhere. You step carefully behind your modest shack, holding your tunic up just enough to avoid what lies beneath. The designated toilet area is a shallow pit dug into the ground, surrounded by a curtain that flaps only when the wind remembers it exists. It's communal. Everyone uses it, including the chickens. And yes, it smells exactly how you think it does. Like defeat in towns. It's somehow worse. People use chamber pots, essentially decorated bowls for collecting yesterday's regrets. Once full. The contents are flung out the window with a charming yell of Gardyloo. which is French for duck if you value your hat. Streets turn into sticky obstacle courses, especially in summer, when the air thickens into a visible fog of filth. Public latrines exist, but they're more of a dare than a solution. Imagine a row of holes carved into a plank, suspended over a flowing channel of questionable water. Now imagine sharing that plank with strangers. No partitions, no privacy. Just you, your neighbor, and the shared trauma of eye contact during awkward moments. Historians still argue whether these communal toilets were innovative sanitation or medieval hazing rituals. And toilet paper, a fantasy. You grab whatever's available leaves, moss, old fabric, or if you're feeling fancy, a bit of hay. It's less soft and absorbent and more bristly reminder of your status. The nobility may have used scraps of linen, but for commoners, comfort wasn't on the menu. There's a reason most people walked bow-legged. It wasn't the archery. You wash your hands. Theoretically. Maybe there's a bucket of rainwater outside. Maybe there's a muddy stream. Soap, if it exists in your household, is made from animal fat and ash. It smells like cooked regret. And even then, you save it for special occasions like Christmas or outbreaks of visible disease. Speaking of disease, remember that everything you touch is already compromised. The outhouse handle, the food bowl, your own hands. Microbes are not yet a concept, but they are extremely busy. Every morning, ritual becomes a potential lottery ticket in the plague sweepstakes. Oh, and if you're working in the fields, forget everything above. You go where you are. Trees, bushes, the corner behind the barn, they all become part of your digestive journey. The countryside is your lavatory. Romantic, isn't it? It gets better if by better you mean weirder. Some monasteries believe that passing gas cleansed the soul. So, certain monks actually documented their bowel habits. You think your journaling routine is personal? Try a scribe, logging flatulence for divine approval. Still, there's one comfort to everyone's in the same sinking chamber pot. From farmer to blacksmith to yeoman archer, you all endure the same bathroom horror show. Even lords and ladies, with their close stools and velvet-lined privies, were only slightly less miserable. They had servants to carry their waste, which sounds nice until you realize someone had to be that servant. You shuffle back to the house, nostrils flaring at the lingering sense of human effort. You wipe your boots on the threshold, though honestly, they were never clean to begin with. Your body feels lighter, your dignity slightly eroded. And as you settle down for a morning bowl of boiled sadness, you can't help but wonder in the future. Will people truly invent seats that flush away their shame? Will there be rooms that smell like lemon and not decay? The goat on the roof seems unimpressed. He pooped in your turnip patch this morning. Again, you glance into the pot and immediately regret it. Breakfast, or something resembling it, is ready. A bowl of pottage, which is less of a dish and more of a life sentence. Pottage is a thick, lumpy soup made by boiling whatever you can find. This morning, that includes cabbage leaves, turnip skins, and possibly a confused-looking beetroot that wandered in by accident. It has been simmering since last Tuesday, and tomorrow's dinner will likely be the same pot, reheated and slightly more mysterious. You eat slowly, not out of politeness, but out of self-defense. The texture is aggressively inconsistent, somewhere between baby food and regret. You chew a twig, not metaphorically, a literal twig. It adds crunch. The flavor profile is gray. You would season it, if you could afford salt. But that's a luxury item, practically worth its weight in gold. So, you stare longingly at a clump of moss on the windowsill and wonder what it tastes like. Bread is available, if you're lucky. But luck is relative. It's not fluffy or warm. It's hard, rock hard, as in medieval combat hard. You could use it as a shield in a tavern brawl. Some loaves contain sawdust, others bulked out with dried peas, beans, or bits of tree bark. The poor don't just eat to survive, they actively fight their food for dominance. Water. Oh, sweet summer child. No, you drink ale every day, at every meal, even children. Not because everyone's a party animal, but because water will try to kill you. River water is a microbial theme park, brimming with bacteria that don't believe in mercy. Beer is safer because it's boiled during brewing, and the low alcohol keeps it relatively clean. But don't get too excited, it's weak, flat, and about as refreshing as lukewarm sadness. Now and then, you might have access to cheese. It's a rare delight, though more solid than spreadable, and sometimes indistinguishable from the soap block in the pantry. You slice a piece. It bends. You eat it anyway. And meat only on feast days, or if something dies unexpectedly. Chicken, occasionally. Pork, if you're lucky and the pig doesn't escape. Beef, almost never. Most livestock are too valuable alive. So, when you do get meat, it's usually stringy, overcooked, and suspiciously chewy. You pretend not to notice. Spices are something you've heard rumors about. Cinnamon, nutmeg, black pepper, they exist somewhere in castles or caravans are the dreams of hungry monks. Historians still argue whether peasants ever tasted them or just imagined their aroma wafting through the thatched roofs like mythical incense. Eating, therefore, is not about enjoyment, it's about calculation. You ration your portions. Eat the soft bits first, and save the tougher chunks to gnaw on later like a squirrel hoarding bark. Hunger is a constant companion, whispering in your ear at all hours. There are no seconds, no dessert, no just a snack before bed. There is food, and then there is not. And God help you if the harvest fails. Famine isn't a plot twist, it's a seasonal risk. One bad storm, one outbreak of blight, and suddenly you're grinding acorns into flour and boiling shoe leather for soup. If things get truly desperate, you eat grass. Yes, actual grass. The kind that cows envy you for. But let's say, miraculously, that you're a yeoman archer with slightly more wealth than your peasant neighbor. You still eat pottage, just with more onions. Maybe even a smoked herring on festival days. You get a few more eggs, some dried apples, a bit of butter. It's not luxury, but it's not bark. Meal times are short. Silent affairs? No conversation. No passing dishes around. You eat with your hands or a wooden spoon, seated on a log or a sack of straw. The fire crackles nearby, filling the hut with both warmth and smoke. Your eyes water, but you keep chewing. And when your stomach is as full as it will get today, you set your bowl down and exhale. You survived another meal. Your teeth are sore. Your jaw is tired, but your belly is less empty. And that, in this world, counts as victory. You stand up from your meal and stretch, but your clothes resist even that simple act. Scratchy, heavy wool wraps itself around you like a judgmental X always there. Never pleasant. Welcome to medieval fashion, where looking good is not an option, and staying warm is more of a vague ambition than a reliable outcome. You own exactly one outfit. It's not a rotation. It's your second skin. A tunic that hasn't seen soap since last Michaelmas. Breeches that sag at the knee and chafe at the worst possible places. And hose that droop like overboiled noodles. The wool is thick, but not in the cozy way, more like the did I just get bit by that way. It's dyed in muted browns or greens, not for style, but because that's the only color anything turns after enough exposure to mud and sheep grease. Undergarments, hilarious. Linen is expensive, if you're lucky. You have a coarse linen shirt underneath your tunic, if you're not lucky. That tunic is riding solo. Either way, the result is the same constant itch, occasional bleeding, and yes, every seam feels like it was stitched by someone who deeply resented you personally. The problem is not just the material, it's also the ecosystem you've built inside your clothing. Fleas, lice, and the occasional ambitious spider make a home here. You scratch your side and come away with what might be a crumb or might be an insect egg. Historians still argue whether lice were just accepted or actively nurtured for company. Bathing doesn't help. You do that maybe once a season, if you're feeling decadent. So your clothes absorb everything: sweat, smoke, pottage drips, rain, and sometimes blood yours, not always from battle. The result is a scent profile best described as fermented despair. You could warn oncoming horses with your presence alone. And shoes. The idea is romantic. The reality is depressing, if you have footwear at all. It's a pair of turn shoes, soft leather things, with the lifespan of a wet leaf. There is no cushioning, no arch support, no right or left foot. You tie them with strips of leather and hope for the best. One puddle, and it's over. The shoe disintegrates like a medieval paper towel. Your soles grow thick from necessity. Calluses become your insoles. You walk carefully, dodging rocks, manure, and the occasional sharp insult hurled from a nearby drunk. Winters make your feet go numb. Summers make them blister. You consider walking backward just for variety. Now imagine this is your best outfit. You sleep in it, you work in it, you get married in it. If you die in it, no one will bother changing your clothes. Why would they? The tunic already smells dead. Fashion, for a yeoman archer, is utilitarian. You might get a hood or a cloak in cold weather, which is just more wool. In battle, you'll wear a gambeson, a padded jacket so thick it might stop an arrow, but only if it's having a particularly good day. Helmets, if available, are shared between friends, enemies, and generations. Some still bear dents from last week's war. And on the odd occasion you attend church or a market fair, you dust yourself off and hope no one notices the moth holes shaped suspiciously like last year's plague. You see the nobles in their silks and furs. You wonder what it feels like to wear something soft, something that doesn't draw blood. But that's another world entirely, one where people own closets. Imagine. The cold irony here is that even nobles aren't exactly comfy. Sure, they have finer fabrics, but they also wear layers upon layers, held together by laces and pins, and often requiring a servant just to get dressed. Imagine not being able to reach your own armpits. Now imagine paying someone to do it for you, badly. Meanwhile, you tie a belt around your tunic to keep it from flapping in the wind. You shove a knife into the belt because every archer needs one, and you step into your day. Your clothes cling to you, not lovingly, but like they're afraid of being left behind. They won't be. You literally have nothing else. And that's the thing. Fashion is a trap, not a statement, not a choice. Just one more uncomfortable reminder that even when you're standing still, medieval life finds new ways to itch. Your mouth aches again, not a sharp, stabbing pain. No. This is more of a full-throated, throbbing reminder that you haven't known dental comfort in years. You poke at a molar with your tongue. Bad move. It shifts slightly, like a tent peg in marshland. Congratulations. That tooth is officially free range now. Welcome to medieval dental hygiene, or rather, the absolute lack thereof. You don't brush your teeth because you don't know the concept. Toothbrush is toothpaste. That sounds suspiciously like wizardry. You might chew on a twig occasionally, like a hopeful beaver trying to self-diagnose. But most of the time, you just let food and time do the damage. Sugar is rare, but when it appears, it acts like an assassin in a velvet cloak, swift, stealthy, and brutal to enamel. Swollen gums, bleeding roots, and a general scent of rot linger behind your words. You try not to speak directly into people's faces, not out of politeness, but because you don't want them to pass out. Historians still argue whether people even notice bad breath, or whether everyone just quietly agreed to suffer in pungent solidarity. And when the pain becomes unbearable, and it always does, you head to the village blacksmith. Yes, the same man who makes horseshoes. Why? Because he owns the only available pair of pliers, and he's not gentle. You sit on a wobbly stool. Someone holds your arms down. There's no alcohol strong enough for this moment, but you swig anyway, because pretending is better than knowing. Blacksmith grabs the tooth. He pulls. There's no countdown. There's no anesthetic. Just steel, screaming, and a geyser of regret. If you're lucky, the tooth comes out. If you're not, part of it stays behind like a party guest who won't take the hint. Infection is now your new roommate. The swelling gets worse. You can't eat on one side of your face. You mumble through pottage like a lopsided squirrel. Of course, people try home remedies. Poultices made of garlic and wine. Rinses with urine. If you're feeling adventurous, some rub their gums with crushed sage or salt, which is just another way of saying, how much pain can I tolerate before blacking out? You've probably lost at least a few teeth by age 25. Some fall out on their own. Others get elbowed out during a brawl. And once they're gone, there's no replacing them. Dentures are for royalty, and even those are carved from ivory or wood. Perfect if you want to look like you're chewing with piano keys. Gum disease runs rampant. Your jaw aches in the winter and swells in the summer. You smile less now, not because of shame, but because stretching your face that way hurts like stepping on a rake barefoot. And while all of this is happening, you hear rumors about leeches? Yes. The medieval all-purpose medical solution put a worm on it. Your neighbor's wife swears by them. They pull out the bad blood, she whispers, as if the blood is plotting against you. You try it once. The leech does its job. You're not sure if you feel better or just lighter. Physicians, the few that exist, don't know about bacteria. They talk about humors instead. Too much black bile. Time for bloodletting. That pain in your mouth. Clearly an imbalance. Here, bite this leather strap while we open a vein. You wonder how removing blood is supposed to help with a rotten tooth. You wonder aloud. Then you faint. Still, the worst part isn't the pain. It's the knowledge that there's no end to it. You'll never know what it feels like to run your tongue over clean, smooth teeth. You'll never taste food without a dull ache. You'll never kiss someone without the faint terror that your gums might bleed on contact. Your breath is your enemy. Your jaw is a battlefield. And your smile, when it does appear, is a toothless confession that you are yet again losing this war. But don't worry, you're not alone. The entire village is gumming their way through life together. In a way, it's almost bonding. Just don't smile too wide. It might fall out. You rise before the sun. Or rather, the sun has the decency to stay down a few more moments while you start working in complete darkness. As a yeoman archer, you're technically above a serf, but not by much. You own your own land, which is noble in theory. In practice, it just means you get to die of exhaustion on your own soil instead of someone else's. Your day begins in the field, not because you enjoy it, because if you don't tend it, you don't eat. And your taxes to the local lord are due whether the harvest is good, bad, or non-existent. Fixed rent, they say, which is charming when you realize your income is entirely based on whether it rains at the right time. You don't negotiate with the weather. It negotiates with you through storms, drought, and spite. The tools you use aren't exactly ergonomic. You've got a wooden plow, iron-tipped if you're lucky, pulled by an ox that looks as tired as you feel. The soil resists your efforts like a stubborn mule. It's heavy, clumpy, and packed with the kind of rocks that appear just to stub your toes. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had any sense of long-term crop rotation, or were just desperately improvising with every passing season. Spoiler, it's probably the latter. The work is repetitive: sow, reap, dig, sweat, repeat. You wear through your own muscles like a blunt scythe. Lunch is something you bring with you in a satchel, usually a lump of dark rye bread and an onion. If you're very fortunate, there's cheese. But that's a Tuesday miracle. And today isn't Tuesday. You have no weekend, no days off. The church may say you should rest on the Sabbath. But guess what? Your cabbage doesn't know it's Sunday. It just knows it needs watering. The weeds don't go to church. They go straight to your crops. Women work just as hard, perhaps harder. Your wife wakes at the same hour, prepares what little food you have, then juggles child rearing with spinning wool and helping in the field. Children don't wait until they're of age to help. If they can walk, they can carry. If they can carry, they can weed. And if they can weed, they're officially employed, even in your role as a military archer. Training happens around the drudgery. You practice with the longbow at twilight. Drawing one requires immense strength, 90 to 110 pounds of force. Your left arm becomes corded with muscle. Your right shoulder perpetually sore. But the crown demands archers, and if you're skilled enough, you might be summoned to war. Which sounds dramatic and valiant, until you realize war is just more walking, more hunger, and more dying. Except now it's other people trying to kill you, not just your liver failing. There are other jobs in the village, but none are easy. The blacksmith works near fire all day, breathing in smoke and iron dust. The tanner handles animal hides soaked in urine, a scent that no amount of dirt can cover. The miller deals with grain and rodents and endless back-breaking wheel repairs. Each profession is a love letter to discomfort, and you, yeoman that you are still one misstep away from ruin. A bad harvest, a sick ox, an unexpected war tax, all of it could land you in debt or starvation. There's no safety net, only the firm, unyielding floor of medieval economics. You look down at your hands, calloused, cracked, permanently stained with soil and the memory of every task you've done since childhood. They don't feel like yours anymore. They belong to the land. You're just borrowing them for a lifetime. And so you work until sunset, and sometimes well after. Because while history books might remember kings and knights, the truth is the world was built on the aching shoulders of people like you. People whose names are forgotten, but whose labor was unforgettable. You wake the next morning not because of the sun, but because your toes have gone numb again. Winter is less of a season and more of an annual test to see who survives. The thatched roof of your hut leaks in a way that could be called charming by a tourist and utterly tragic by you, the inhabitant. The wind doesn't so much howl as whisper horrible things through every crack and crevice in the wooden walls. You pull your one blanket tighter. It's damp. Of course it is. The fire went out during the night. You could start it again. But that means stepping out into the frost to get more wood you gathered yourself. From a forest that feels more like a futile obstacle course. Good news, you're technically allowed to gather kindling. Bad news if you take too much or cross onto the wrong patch of Lord-owned land. It's poaching. Punishment ranges from fines to fingers. In summer, the cruel joke reverses. Your house becomes an oven. You sleep on top of the blanket, not under it, and pray for a breeze. There are no fans, no ice, and certainly no cold drinks. Water stored in clay pots might help a little, but only if it's shaded and you ignore the bugs swimming in it. Clothing doesn't help much. In winter, you wear every scrap of wool you own, layered like a medieval lasagna. It's still not enough. In summer, you strip down to your base tunic coarse, scratchy, and already soaked in sweat by 9 a.m. Historians still argue whether yeoman families developed any meaningful seasonal wardrobe adaptations or simply suffered through every month with a sort of grim enthusiasm. Spoiler, it's mostly the suffering. Parasites love all weather. Lice and fleas thrive in your seams. Unbothered by temperature, you itch constantly. There's no ointment, no lotion, just resignation. If anything, winter at least freezes a few of them to death. Summer, they multiply. You are their mobile home. Rain should be a blessing. It waters the crops, replenishes wells, but for you, it's a disaster. Roads become mudslides. Roofs cave in. Laundry takes days to dry, if you even have the nerve to wash it in this weather. And remember, your one good pair of shoes are made of stitched leather, not waterproofed. You go squish with every step. Heat brings with it the buzzing swarm of flies and midges and mosquitoes, who treat you like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Sleep in summer is a joke. You lie in sweat, covered by a thin veil to keep bugs off. Though the bugs don't care about your boundaries. They never have. You can't win. In winter, you pray for heat. In summer, you dream of snow. Your bones hurt year-round. Knees crack, fingers swell, joints ache. You don't call it arthritis, you call it normal, if you're lucky. Your house sits near a forest or on a slight hill, allowing a faint breeze or shielding you from the worst gusts. If you're unlucky, and you probably are, you get the worst of both icy winds in winter. Full sun roasting in summer. Insulation. Try hanging an old cloth across the doorway and pretending it makes a difference. Inside, the temperature never feels like an escape. Your walls don't hold heat, and your floor is packed dirt. It breathes cold up through your feet. You sleep curled, fetal, praying not for comfort, but for the bare minimum of survival. And yet somehow, this miserable balancing act with the seasons is routine. You've adapted, your skin thickened, your expectations lowered. You no longer hope for comfort, just slightly less discomfort. That's the real weather forecast. You hear it before you see it. The sluggish, irregular drip of water into a cracked clay basin. Your throat is dry, but not in acute. I forgot to drink water today, Way. It's the kind of dry where your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth and you start eyeing puddles with reckless curiosity. The problem is that clean water doesn't really exist. Not here, not for you. You don't have a well. You don't have a filter. You certainly don't have indoor plumbing. Unless you count the cracked wooden gutter that sometimes funnels rain into a barrel, assuming it hasn't been fouled by bird droppings, dust, or the occasional dead rodent. Historians still argue whether water access for rural yeomen was a community affair, or every peasant for himself. Either way, you lose. You dip your fingers into the basin and sip. It tastes like mud, and something worse you try not to name. There's a reason your neighbors drink weak beer all day. The brewing process, rudimentary as it is, at least kills off some of the terrifying microbes that turn your insides into a carnival ride. The irony, you can barely afford beer. So water it is, contaminated, warm, and audaciously proud of it. Bathing, if you can even call it that, is a seasonal event. You wash in the stream when it's warm enough, and only nobody's upstream dumping waste into it, which spoiler again they are. Some folks say bathing opens the pores and lets disease in, so they avoid it. Others say not bathing at all makes the lice angry. There's no winning here, just a slippery slope between filthy and marginally less filthy. And bathing isn't a solo act. It requires cooperation, firewood, a heated cauldron if you're rich, or at least lucky and someone to watch for wandering livestock, or the local pervert who thinks naked peasant is peak entertainment. It's no spa day. It's not even a shower. It's logistical warfare against dirt and shame. Disease travels through water like gossip at a medieval tavern. Diarrhea, dysentery, cholera, you name it. Your stomach turns with the memory of the last time you dared drink from the shared village bucket after little Tom coughed directly into it. And yet, you did it again yesterday because you had to. Worms are common. You can feel them squirming sometimes. No one talks about it except old Mags, who names hers and insists they add warmth. She also once licked a frog to predict the weather, so credibility is thin. Rain is supposed to help. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it turns the only road to town into a medieval slip and slide. You fall, you curse. You get up with your tunic soaked in human waste and mystery puddles. Do you rinse off with what? The same water that just took you down. And despite everything, water remains your lifeline. You carry it in slow-washing leather bladders or brittle wooden buckets, always heavy, always leaking. You boil it when you can, which is almost never. You dream of clear springs and cold wells the way modern people dream of beachfront Airbnbs. Your children cry for it. Your animals need it. You can't survive without it, and yet it might kill you. It's a relationship full of trust issues and gastrointestinal betrayal. Still, you tip the basin and drink again. You don't even flinch this time, because this is life. Not glamorous, not clean, but weirdly persistent. Just like you. And now, with your hands still wet from that murky basin and your feet aching from the uneven dirt floor, you lie back against the straw mattress and let the sounds fade. The wind outside softens, the bite of cold just a memory under the hum of imagined warmth. Your tunic clings to you not from comfort, but from the lived-in weight of a long, long day. The village is quiet, the fire's out, and for the first time, maybe, the bugs have stopped biting. You curl deeper under your one woolen blanket, letting your breath slow and your eyes rest. No one's knocking. No one's yelling. Even the parasites seem to be asleep mercifully, just for now, in the quiet. You can almost pretend the water was clean, the meal was filling, and the roof didn't leak. The illusion is gentle, soft, almost enough to carry you into a dream where bathing is weekly and bread doesn't crack your teeth. So rest. Brave yeoman. You've survived another day that history tried to forget. Now, we slip past the velvet curtains of time and tiptoe into a palace nursery that smells faintly of wax, old bloodlines, and generational trauma. You lie, swaddled not in soft muslin, but in embroidered destiny, because unfortunately, you've just been born into one of the most mentally unstable royal families in world history. The good news, you're technically a prince. The bad news, everyone around you wants you dead, including your relatives, your advisors, and possibly the midwife. You would never think that being wrapped in purple silk could be so suffocating. But then again, no one warned you that purple was just another shade of danger. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to post your location and local time down in the comments. I always love to know where and when history finds you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You grow up crawling past statues of dead uncles, every bust looking vaguely alarmed. Caligula, the name alone sounds like an overpriced dessert. But this little boy becomes the sour cherry on top of a cake made of pure madness. His childhood isn't what you'd call stable. Dad was a celebrated general who mysteriously died on campaign. Mom, Agrippina the Elder, smart, ambitious, and eventually exiled. His siblings executed or banished one by one. Like an increasingly ominous game of hide and seek, you, the toddler Caligula, are forced to smile politely as your family tree is pruned with a machete. Historians still argue whether young Caligula was traumatized into madness or simply born marinated in it. But by the time he's brought to Capri to live with Emperor Tiberius, things have already gone off the rails. Capri is not a peaceful island getaway. It's basically a paranoid emperor's fortress of dread sunshine, cliffs, and casual executions. Imagine growing up with a grandpa figure who throws people off cliffs before breakfast. You get desensitized fast. Your toys are bones. Your lullabies are screams. Then there's Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, not a nickname you earn from being merely difficult. He loses his father at age 3, his mother at 8, possibly by poison. Raised in the Kremlin, but treated more like court furniture. Ivan grows up with starvation, abuse, and emotional whiplash. Advisors ignore him unless they're slapping him. Boyars, the noble class, feud openly, while Ivan watches from the sidelines like a child actor in a political soap opera. And yet, both boys learn the same lesson early: no one is safe. Not even children. In fact, especially not children. Quirky, detail, Caligula, once dressed up like all the gods in the Roman pantheon just to confuse people. One day he's Mercury, the next he's Venus. Why? Because when no one loves you as you are, you reinvent yourself daily. Or maybe you just get bored. There's also a cursed sense of destiny bubbling underneath their birthrights. Ivan reads scripture obsessively and believes he's chosen by God. Caligula thinks he is a god. Small difference. Same consequences. The ancient world doesn't have trauma counselors, only oracles, and they never tell you to drink water and go outside. Instead, they whisper that your enemies are within your own bloodline. And unfortunately, you believe them. By the time both Caligula and Ivan come to power, their souls are cracked like medieval stained glass. They shine brilliantly madly, but if you look too close, you cut yourself on the edges. You're older now, taller, wearing something that vaguely resembles royal pajamas and smells like incense, silver polish. An old fear. Your crown's not quite on straight, partly because it's too big, partly because the weight of inherited trauma warps your spine. Welcome to the throne. It's not a seat, it's a trap. And the moment you sit down, everyone starts sharpening their knives, metaphorical and otherwise. Let's start with Caligula, because if you're going to unravel, you might as well do it with flair. He begins his reign with all the pomp of a popular golden boy. The Roman people love him. He pardons political exiles. He gives bonuses to the army. He throws parties that make the previous emperor look like a teetotaling accountant. For a hot minute, it feels like the empire has its sparkle back. And then, like every Roman feast, indigestion sets in. Historians still argue whether Caligula suffered a mental breakdown due to illness, trauma, or simple power overload. Whatever it is. One day, the light in his eyes turns into wildfire. He stops pretending. The same man who once spoke gently to senators now openly mocks them. The man who danced in public now forces others to join. At sword point, he builds a temple to himself, declares his horse, Incititus, a priest and possibly a senator. Yes, you heard that correctly. In a regime where humans were disposable, a horse got promoted. But Ivan doesn't burst like fireworks. He simmers like a poisoned stew. After crowning himself the first Tsar of all Russia, he spends the early part of his rule wisely reforming government, reworking laws, even creating a standing army. It's almost like he's trying to prove he's not the child everyone ignored. But then, tragedy strikes. His beloved wife, Anastasia, dies. Poison, perhaps. Or typhoid. Either way, it's the final splinter in a very fragile man. From that point on, Ivan's rule descends into what can only be described as a hallucinatory horror film. He creates the Oprichnina, a secret police force with black robes, black horses, and a black sense of humor. They ride through Russia wielding brooms and dog-head symbols of their sacred duty to sniff out and sweep away treason. They also happen to murder entire towns. You know, minor detail. Quirky tidbit. Ivan had a pet bear he let wander around his court and maul guests he didn't like. In a modern HR setting, this is considered problematic. In Ivan's Russia, it's just Tuesday. And let's not forget Caligula's artistic streak. He builds floating palaces, massive ships decked out in marble and gardens. They sink after his death, which feels metaphorically appropriate. He also enjoys watching executions during dinner. Nothing like a little bloodletting to help digestion. You, the listener, might be wondering how anyone tolerated this. Well, here's the uncomfortable truth. Fear is a fantastic deodorant. It covers every stench of cruelty. And in monarchies where lineage is sacred, the line between divine right and divine madness gets blurred fast. Both rulers start to believe they are not simply men, but something bigger. Caligula channels gods. Ivan channels divine punishment. And everyone around them is too terrified, too ambitious, or too exhausted to say otherwise. The thrones they sit on are not made of gold. They're constructed from silence, superstition, and family secrets buried under palace tiles. But that doesn't stop the kings from decorating them with bones, sometimes literally. You wake up again this time, not in your own bed, but in a heavily guarded palace room, under velvet drapes that cost more than most villages. There are whispers outside your door, but you're used to whispers now. They hum like background music in this royal soap opera you call a life. Your uncles are probably plotting again. Or maybe it's your half-brother, or your wife's brother. It really doesn't matter. Everyone wants the throne, and no one's hiding it very well. Royal families aren't so much families as they are small-scale crime syndicates in elaborate robes. Marriage becomes strategic warfare, and children are either pawns or future threats. Your cousins are assets, your siblings are competition, and your in-laws, let's just say, holidays are tense. Take the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Caligula didn't become emperor because he was the most qualified. He got the job because everyone more qualified was already dead executed, exiled, or politely murdered in their sleep. And when Caligula took the throne, he made sure to continue the family tradition of keeping things interesting. He executed his cousin, Tiberius Gemellus, despite once naming him heir. Changed his mind. Apparently, must have been a Tuesday. Historians still argue whether Caligula's paranoia was inherited or simply a survival skill. After all, in a world where daggers replace dinner invitations, you'd be twitchy too. In Russia, Ivan's bloodline drama had a slower, sadder burn. After the death of his first son, yes, the one he probably killed with his own hands, he was left with a deeply unqualified heir and a kingdom trembling under the weight of his legacy. Ivan's family life wasn't so much dysfunctional as it was a case study in how trauma eats its young, and then makes more young. There's this constant pattern in monarchic families. Hurt people, and then marry them, and then produce heirs with really unfortunate jawlines. Fringe tidbit. Some reports suggest Caligula had a deep and affectionate relationship with his sisters. Too affectionate, according to some ancient whispers, whether true or the product of political slander. It says a lot about how power and scandal were fused into royal branding. You're not just managing a country, you're managing the narrative. Even if that narrative includes an incest subplot. Meanwhile, Ivan the Terrible built an elaborate genealogy to prove that his bloodline descended directly from Caesar Augustus. Never mind the geographical and historical leap he needed the story to stick. Because without it, what was left? Just a crown, some corpses, and a lot of very cold winters. And you, poor listener, find yourself in the middle of a court where everyone is either dying to be you or dying because of you. You try to enjoy breakfast, but your food taster collapses mid-bite. Another one. That's the third this week. You should really start tipping better. Family in these palaces isn't measured in love or trust. It's measured in how quietly you can remove someone and how convincingly you can pretend you didn't. The most powerful words aren't "I love you," but "tell no one." You try to keep a low profile, but that's hard when your last name is a target and your birthday cake comes with surveillance. You start to understand why Caligula built secret passageways, why Evan moved his court constantly, and why neither of them ever really smiled without twitching. Because in royal families like these, you're either ruling or rotting. You leave the dining hall what's left of your appetite, slowly curling up in your stomach beside that poisoned date you wisely didn't eat. Now it's time for royal duties, which means pretending to govern while everyone else pretends you're sane. But you're not entirely sure anymore. After all, when your family tree resembles a murder investigation board, clarity becomes a luxury. Take Emperor Nero. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, didn't just push him toward power, she practically threw him at it. She maneuvered marriages, assassinated rivals, and held influence so tightly it practically left bruises. At first, Nero leaned on her. Then he leaned less. Then he arranged for her to take a boat trip. And let's just say the boat didn't exactly float home. Historians still argue whether Agrippina's death was ordered out of fear, ambition, or the classic mother-son power struggle turned Greco-Roman tragedy. Once Nero had cleared that emotional roadblock, he really flourished, by which we mean he sang bad poetry while Rome burned, literally, and when he wasn't fiddling historically inaccurate. But we're keeping the metaphor. He was arranging suspicious deaths and marrying boys dressed as his dead wife. Because nothing says healthy grieving like a state-sponsored drag funeral. Meanwhile, back in Russia, Ivan the Terrible was mastering the art of emotional regulation by creating the oprichnina, a state within a state, led by men dressed in black robes, riding black horses, and wielding the kind of authority that makes no questions asked feel like a gentle whisper. Their job: identify, torture, and eliminate anyone who so much as sneezed suspiciously. The result? A kingdom run by fear and a czar increasingly isolated from reality. You, pacing the palace hall with your velvet slippers and echoing doubts, begin to wonder if the air in these golden rooms does something to the mind. Royalty, after all, has its own climate. It's heavy, dense with expectation. Everyone smiles, but no one trusts. Everyone bows, but their knees itch to rise up. You pass a portrait, it stares at you with smug, painted judgment. You can't help but note that the artist was probably executed right after finishing it for failing to make the nose symmetrical. Again, remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier stories? Royal madness is like that, meant to protect, but deeply unsettling when applied directly to the head. Monarchs, with their divine right and inherited trauma, often believed they were chosen by the heavens, but surrounded by demons. So they fought demons in everyone they knew. Quirky fact time: Caligula once declared war on the god Neptune and ordered his soldiers to collect seashells as the spoils of battle. Either performance art or a nervous breakdown your call, so here you are. Wondering what's worse, the madness of the monarch or the family who fuels it? You think about your cousin locked in the West Wing for his own safety. You think about your uncle who keeps writing suspicious poems about daggers and thrones. You think about your own reflection, twitching in a silver goblet. You drink deeply, just wine. You hope power doesn't just corrupt, it isolates, decorates, and occasionally performs musical numbers in public while Rome burns. It's heavy, lonely, and smells faintly of paranoia and perfume. And if you're lucky, you only go a little bit mad. You wake up the next morning to the sounds of screaming, not the violent kind, not yet. Just the usual royal tantrum, echoing from the nursery wing. It's a cousin, or a half-nephew. Honestly, you've stopped keeping track. The bloodline's more like a puddle now, a muddy, shallow swirl of names, titles, and the kind of genetic confusion that makes family reunions feel like medical case studies. Across history, monarchs and their families have held on to power like toddlers gripping knives chaotically and with frequent injuries. Take the Habsburgs. Their family tree wasn't so much a tree as a tightly coiled vine strangling itself. Cousins married cousins until jaws didn't work right, and kings were born with chins large enough to cast shadows. The infamous Habsburg jaw wasn't just a punchline, it was a warning label. Your own breakfast is served by a steward who refuses to meet your eye. That's normal. Yesterday, someone in the royal kitchen sprinkled nutmeg on the queen's bread pudding. She's allergic. He's now in the oubliette. Historians still argue whether that was an accident, a political message, or just poor seasoning instincts. But the truly dangerous part isn't the cooks. It's the siblings. Siblings in royal families are a unique breed. Born with titles, raised with daggers, sometimes metaphorical, sometimes very real. They smile through their teeth at feasts and whisper betrayal between bites. If a monarch has a brother, there's a 70% chance he'll either end up in a monastery or leading a rebellion, or both, depending on the weather. You remember Ivan the Terrible's son? A rising heir with promise until Ivan cracked his skull in a fit of rage. The Tsar wept over the body afterward. But, well, a lot of fathers hug their kids. Ivan chose bludgeoning. Back in England, the Plantagenets weren't much better. The Wars of the Roses turned cousin against cousin in a decades-long bloodbath that started over questions of succession and ended in a flower-themed civil war. It's basically the medieval version of fighting over the family business, only with more swords and fewer awkward holiday dinners. You, trying to stay alive in this dynastic hurricane, realize it's not enough to be related to power. You have to survive it. Avoid too much charisma. Don't attract the monarch's jealousy. Don't be too clever, that's treason. Too dull, that's treason. Too like walking a tightrope while everyone in your family holds scissors. Meanwhile, Caligula made his horse a senator. Maybe because the horse was more trustworthy than his advisors. Or maybe because that's just what happens when no one tells the emperor no. You look around at your fellow nobles and realize if someone made a chicken pope tomorrow, you'd clap politely and offer the bird a chair. There's a fringe theory that monarchies, once they accumulate enough power, begin to cannibalize themselves from the inside out. That it's not outside invasion or rebellion that topples them, but dinner table politics and trust that corrodes like old silver. In other words, royal families are often the kingdom's first enemies. You sit quietly. You smile at your cousin. You keep one hand on your goblet and the other near the hidden knife under your sleeve, just in case the pudding is poisoned. Again, this afternoon, you're summoned again to the royal portrait room. Not because they miss you. No. It's time for another family painting. You know, those oil-on-canvas lies that future historians will look at and say, what a noble and unified dynasty. Meanwhile, you're standing next to an uncle who once tried to suffocate your father with a goose-down pillow. Smile. The artist dabs at your cheek with a brush. You smell linseed oil, mildew, and something that might be fear, because it's hard to paint someone whose position in court depends on how moody the monarch feels that day. Blink wrong, and you're immortalized in oil paint just before you're dismembered in real life. Royal portraits were political statements, not family keepsakes. And you're being painted next to a woman you're told is your cousin. She might also be your sister. Historians still argue whether monarchs truly understood their own family trees. or if they just played genetic roulette and hoped for the best. You try to hold your posture. Royalty does not slouch, but it's hard when your robe is 12 pounds of embroidered silk and gilt, and your stomach's still recovering from yesterday's eel surprise, which was surprising only in how vividly it returned later. You glance sideways at the child heir, standing stiffly under a velvet sash. The boy is 7, and already has a taste for falconry, bloodletting, and minor executions. One of the servants called him promising. Another called him terrifying. Neither has been seen since Tuesday. Royal children were raised in a petri dish of paranoia. Nannies, tutors, poison tasters, etiquette masters, and political advisors, all orbiting like anxious planets. The goal, mold a future ruler. The result often. A deeply confused teenager who thought affection came with a dowry and hugs were code for betrayal. And then there's marriage. Because nothing says romantic union like a treaty. You remember the royal cousin shipped off to Bavaria at 14 to marry a man 3 decades older because someone wanted a trade agreement for sheep. Love. That's for peasants and troubadours. Monarchs marry strategically, divorce diplomatically, and mourn with convenience. Oh, and if the marriage doesn't produce heirs, well, that's treason adjacent. The queen may be replaced with a younger, more fertile model, or accused of witchcraft, or both. Take Henry VIII, who cycled through wives like tunics, occasionally beheading them when patience ran low. It's amazing what power does to courtship standards. Speaking of power, back in the portrait room, someone sneezes. Everyone freezes. You scan the monarch's expression. Will this be considered an omen? A sign of weakness? Or just allergies? Royal superstitions are a dicey thing. One sneeze might trigger a prophecy. 2 might lead to a trial. And through it all, the painter keeps working. Because even in dynasties ruled by madness, someone has to make it look beautiful. These images will hang in stone halls long after you're gone, smiling through gritted teeth. And the child heir, he'll grow into a king, and likely have someone like you painted next to him, just before vanishing under mysterious circumstances. You shift your feet slightly. Your slippers are lined with ermine and discomfort. But you hold still, because history is being painted. And in this family, the paint is often blood. Dinner is served, which means someone's about to get poisoned. You walk carefully, regally, into the grand dining hall, a space where chandeliers glitter and shadows whisper. You're seated beneath an enormous tapestry depicting some heroic battle that may or may not have happened, depending on which family member commissioned it. Across the table, someone's eyeing the roast pheasant like it personally owes them money. Welcome to royal dining. The table groans under the weight of delicacies, candied fruits, stuffed peacocks, silver bowls of jelly made from questionable parts of animals. And in the middle of it all, the royal wine goblets, each assigned to a very specific person, lest a mix-up result in a diplomatic crisis or a quick death. You take yours with a nod, then pretend not to notice the food taster sweating more than the roast. Ah yes, the food taster, a real job, real person. Their sole purpose, eat before the monarch does, and maybe die for it. Talk about job insecurity. You glance at yours. He's young, nervous, and already halfway through a venison pie. He gives you a weak thumbs up. You do not feel reassured. Historians still argue whether the majority of these testers actually caught poison in time, or if their presence was just for royal theater. Either way, nobody touches a plate until the tasters nod, like doomed men giving final blessings. Then, at last, forks well, knives. Because forks are still viewed by some in court as foreign and suspicious are lifted. You cut into something that might be duck or disappointment. The gravy is thick. The air is thicker. Everyone's smiling politely, pretending not to be terrified. Conversations drift across the table like poisoned butterflies. The Queen Mother asks the Chancellor about grain shipments. He nods, eyes flicking nervously toward his wine. The Duchess of somewhere unimportant loudly praises the pheasant, which she hasn't touched. Across from her, the king's bastard half-brother picks at candied chestnuts while watching the crown prince, like a cat, watches a wounded bird. You know better than to eat too quickly. One wrong reaction, a cough, a wrinkle of the nose, and you might be accused of insulting the chef, the realm, or the ghost of an ancestor currently haunting the East Tower. Oh, and about those ghosts, every royal palace has them, or claims to. Great Uncle Harold, headless but punctual. A wailing lady in the portrait gallery who only appears before political disasters. The jester who vanished one Mardi Gras and now jingles faintly in the attics, quirky or not. The servants swear by them. One swore at one and woke up bald, of course. The most dangerous presence at this table isn't supernatural, it's political. Because behind the golden platters and embroidered napkins, this is a battlefield. Each smile is strategy. Each toast is loaded. There's always someone waiting to marry better, rise higher, replace faster, and if you don't keep up, your dinner. Remember cousin Sophia. She insulted the ambassador from Hungary by laughing too hard at his mustache. She now lives in a distant convent, finding peace. Her replacement, also named Sophia, confusingly sits to your left, smiling with perfect teeth and eyes like razors. The second course is brought out. Something jellied, something trembling. You take a bite and hope your stomach doesn't stage a rebellion. Monarchs may rule nations, but their digestive systems are just as petty as yours. And as the musicians start playing some sad string piece that sounds suspiciously like a funeral march, you lean back, sip your wine, and wonder who, at this table, is the most dangerous, the one with the dagger, or the one with the smile. Either way, you don't plan to finish dessert. The palace whispers at night, and you're not entirely sure it's the wind. You retire to your chambers, retire being royal, speak for sprint through dark corridors in heavy velvet while pretending everything is fine. The halls are lit by flickering torches that cast long, twitchy shadows, and the portraits watch you like they know what you did last summer, which, depending on your royal pedigree, probably involved betrayal, accidental war, or cousin marriage. Your bedchamber is grand by medieval standards. There's a canopied bed draped in brocade, a fireplace that doesn't work, and enough velvet to smother a rebellion. The mattress is stuffed with goose feathers, which sounds delightful until you realize it means you're sharing a bed with sharp quills and angry dreams. But hey, it's better than the servants' hay pile, which is currently occupied by a cat, 2 footmen, and possibly a ghost. You sit at your vanity, and a maid silently begins unpinning your hair, careful not to tug, lest she accidentally insult your status and lose a hand. In the mirror, candlelight flickers across your face. You look regal. You also look exhausted, because you are. This is the hour when court rumors ripen. Someone saw the king sneaking into the West Wing. Someone heard the Duchess crying in the crypt. Someone claims the jester was seen alive in the wine cellar, though that might have just been a barrel rolling itself. The royal household never truly sleeps. Servants creep through halls like mice in silk slippers. Guards exchange rumors faster than watch rotations. And nobles who should absolutely be in bed are instead holding secret meetings about inheritance matters, which always seems to end with someone falling off a tower. Historians still argue whether the paranoia of monarchs like Ivan the Terrible was psychological instability or simply a very logical reaction to living in a house full of ambitious relatives and poisoned plums. Either way, no one's locking their door because they feel secure. You check the bolts on your own door twice. Then you climb into bed and pull the velvet covers over your head, which smells faintly of lavender and faintly of mothballs. The embroidered ceiling above your bed depicts angels and clouds. You try to focus on that. You try not to focus on the tapping sound in the corridor. There's a knock. Soft, deliberate. Your blood runs approximately 12 degrees colder because this could mean anything. A summons from the queen. A drunk cousin looking for the wrong chamber. A servant with bad news. A masked assassin, here to collect political debts. You don't answer. You don't breathe. Eventually, the knock is followed by silence, which is worse, because now you're lying in bed with nothing but imagination, and royal imagination is a cruel, vivid thing. You think of Caligula's night walks, of whispered threats, of the baby prince who vanished without explanation. You think about all the royals who once slept in this room and didn't wake up in it. To calm yourself, you list your family members by threat level. Aunt Agatha, suspiciously nice. Brother-in-law, too quiet. Your own sister, a sweetheart who just happens to practice alchemy and keeps a pet raven. You finally drift into something like sleep. Not quite rest, not quite nightmare. In your dream, the portraits whisper secrets, and your crown is made of teeth. You wake once, just before dawn, to the sound of distant screaming. Maybe it's foxes. Maybe it's politics. Either way, you roll over and try not to think about it. Morning arrives, not gently, but like a lance to the ribs. A servant pounds at your door. You groan, peel one eye open, and remember you are royalty, which unfortunately means you must rise to face another day of fragile power structures, flattery marathons, and breakfast accompanied by strategic marriages. You stumble out of bed and into your robe, which is embroidered, regal, and somehow still drafty. Outside, the castle courtyard hums with early activity. Horses clop, pages scurry, and nobles pretend to enjoy each other's company. You are expected to attend a meeting about grain storage that will inevitably devolve into a duel over honor, wheat, or someone's third wife. You pass through the grand hallway, nodding at portraits of your ancestors. All of them gaze down with that tight-lipped look that says, "We ruled this land, went slightly insane, and you might too." Historians still argue whether inherited madness in royal bloodlines stemmed from centuries of inbreeding or the sheer pressure of pretending your cousin's poetry is good. Breakfast is served in the great hall. You are seated at the long table, flanked by family members whose smiles are so sharp they could slice sausage. On the menu, stale bread, watery wine, and a side of veiled threats. Your uncle, to the left, jokes about falconry accidents. Your niece, to the right, talks about plague outbreaks with suspicious enthusiasm. You sip wine and wonder whether it's laced with something festive. Every royal meal is a theatrical performance with high stakes. You must eat, speak, and gesture with the elegance of someone who isn't plotting or being plotted against. But everyone is, always. There is a messenger today. He bows deeply and announces news from the border, depending on the tone of his voice. This could mean a neighboring prince is invading or proposing. It's a coin toss in royal diplomacy. You nod sagely, even though you secretly don't understand half the politics and would much prefer to be fishing or impersonating a commoner for fun. Oh, but remember the jester, the one who disappeared 3 months ago. His hat was found in the moat. Just the hat. No body, no explanation. Now there's a rumor that the queen keeps it under her pillow as a good luck charm. You glance her way. She's smiling. Too much. There's talk of weddings again. Someone must marry someone else to secure an alliance with a duchy that hasn't mattered since the last crusade. And if you say no, well, you could fall ill, permanently, or be sent to govern a swampy province full of bores and discontent. You take another bite of hard cheese and dream of simpler times. Times when the worst thing to worry about was leaky armor or Latin lessons. But now, you are deep in the madness, surrounded by relatives who dress like saints and act like Shakespearean villains, ruled by etiquette, poisoned by politeness, and slowly dissolving into a regal performance of survival. Outside, the sun rises higher, the bells ring, a falcon screams, another day begins. You smile, because you must. You nod, because they're watching. You rise, because you are a monarch, or close enough to bleed like one. Now, let the halls grow quiet in your mind, the echoes of ambition, of whispered betrayals and clinking goblets, begin to fade like footsteps on marble. Picture the candlelight dimming across the long corridors, shadows retreating into corners where secrets no longer stir. You are no longer in that world of crowns and conspiracies, velvet and venom. You are safe now, far from banquet tables and cousin-driven paranoia. Let your breath slow. Each inhale gently carries you further from the great hall, and each exhale releases the heavy velvet of royal pressure. The portraits on the wall blur into sleep-softened faces. The tapping at the door fades into harmless wind, and even the dagger-like smiles lose their edge. Tonight, there are no more feasts, no more alliances, no more whispered threats disguised as flattery. Only stillness. Only the quiet of knowing the dream has passed, and morning is still far away. Rest now. Sovereign soul. Even monarchs, especially monarchs, deserve sleep. Now, we open the creaking cell door on one of history's strangest customs, the final meal before execution. It's quiet, except for the clink of a metal tray sliding onto a rough wooden surface. You'd never think a bowl of ice cream or a slice of toast could become the star of someone's final act. But here we are, across cultures and centuries. Governments have offered last meals as something between courtesy and theater, though not always both. Sometimes it's mercy. Other times, it feels like a performance held for an invisible audience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing barefoot on cold stone. The air smells like iron and mildew. And in the corner of the cell sits a dented bowl of food. Just food. Except it isn't. This is your final request. Your last bit of autonomy. And what you choose says everything. Or nothing. In the 18th century, some believed a final meal could absolve you of sins. Others believed it gave the executioner a cleaner conscience. Historians still argue whether the tradition began as religious ritual or bureaucratic formality. The U.S., perhaps the modern face of the tradition, didn't make final meals formal until the late 19th century. Before that, prisoners got whatever was on hand, often dry bread or leftover stew. But as executions became public and press-worthy, the ritual grew. What someone ate before dying became tabloid gold. The more dramatic the request, the more ink it got. Yet, not every country embraced the tradition. In Japan, prisoners are not told when their execution will occur, let alone handed a menu. In other cultures, the condemned are denied entirely. Food is fuel, not comfort. In one particularly unsettling fringe case from 1837 England, a man named John Horwood was given cheese and ale, only for his skin to later be turned into the cover of a book documenting his crime. Yes, you're allowed to shiver. Whether that counts as poetic punishment or Victorian creepiness, still up for debate. Fast forward to more familiar centuries, and the menu starts to bloom. Steak and eggs, fried chicken, lobster tails, Coca-Cola, and sometimes even junk food mountains that no human could reasonably finish. Because the real feast isn't for the prisoner, it's for the record. The witnesses, the newspaper readers scanning a headline over breakfast. Still, every tray delivered to a cell whispers the same quiet irony. Here is kindness, followed by cruelty. A warm roll, followed by a cold room. And you, sitting in that final hour, might ask yourself whether to savor each bite or let the food go cold while your thoughts boil. You'd expect those hours to be full of begging, sobbing, trembling. But what you'll find is a strange, heavy calm. Some eat everything. Some eat nothing. Some eat as if it's the most important thing they'll ever do. And of course, it is because when time runs out, even a sandwich becomes sacred. And sometimes, it's the last honest thing left. You're still seated in that cell, feet numb against the damp floor, when a voice outside says, "He asked for fried chicken." The guards speak like it's a normal order at a diner, not a man's final indulgence before the noose. You lean in now, peering through the decades into the case of Victor Fieger, the last man executed in Iowa in 1963. His last meal, a single olive, not a sandwich, not steak, just one small green orb with a pit still inside. You would never think that simplicity could be so jarring, but there's something unsettling about such restraint. Maybe he hoped the seed would grow into an olive tree on his grave. A small protest against finality. Historians still argue whether this was a symbol of peace, repentance, or just a man with no appetite. Either way, the contrast is sharp modern systems allow nearly anything within reason. And here comes a man who chooses almost nothing. Compare that to someone like John Wayne Gacy, who ordered a feast a bucket of KFC, fried shrimp, French fries, and strawberries. Yes, you can almost hear your arteries clogging just from the list. The contrast is brutal. Some see the meal as indulgence, others as message. Some seem to celebrate their notoriety with gluttony. Others quietly fade out with nothing but a spoonful of symbolism. There's even the case of Teresa Lewis, the first woman executed in Virginia in nearly 100 years. Her final request, fried chicken, sweet peas with butter, apple pie, and Dr. Kalbar pepper. Southern comfort distilled into one greasy goodbye. Is it a request shaped by nostalgia, a taste of a simpler time, or just the only way to feel warm in a system built to be cold? One mainstream historical fact: the tradition of offering a final meal in America is believed to have been influenced by Christian sacramental practices like the Last Supper, where the meal carries meaning far beyond nutrition. But where Christ broke bread in brotherhood, the condemned break it in isolation. That's the sad poetry of it. And here's a little-known tidbit in Texas, the most active execution state in recent history. The final meal tradition was revoked in 2011. Why a man named Lawrence Brewer ordered a ludicrous spread, 2 chicken fried steaks, a triple bacon cheeseburger, a cheese omelet, a bowl of fried okra, 3 root beers, a pound of barbecue, a half loaf of bread, peanut butter fudge, and a pint of ice cream, and then ate none of it. Public outrage followed, and Texas said no more special requests. Now, prisoners there get the standard tray, mac and cheese, perhaps a slice of bread. No symbolism, no protest, just the machine doing what it does. And if you think these choices are just about food, you've missed the real meal entirely. It's about control. For the first time in months, or years, or decades, the prisoner gets to choose something. And even if it's just how salty their fries are, that's something. So you sit there, staring at the plate, wondering what would you choose? Something nostalgic from your childhood, a final indulgence, or nothing at all? Perhaps the olive makes more sense now. A quiet act in a world that demands noise. You're still in the room, barely a whisper away from the silence that trails every final meal. Your mind drifts now, backward through time, and stops on a woman sitting upright in a 19th century cell. Her corset long discarded, hair braided tightly as if that alone might keep her composed. Her name is Marie Joseph Corriveau, a Canadian folk legend of sorts, executed in 1763. What did she eat before facing her hanging in Quebec? No one wrote it down. Some say salted pork and black bread. Others whisper it was nothing but cold broth and bitter wine. You would never think that a meal could reveal so much about society, but the crumbs left behind tell you who gets remembered and who becomes folklore. Historians still argue whether Corriveau was a victim of abuse or a cunning murderer. Either way, the gallows were built, and the story was spun. Just like her plate sparse, provincial, anonymous. Compare that with the growing theatricality of final meals in America and Britain by the late 19th century. Some condemned men began requesting elaborate menus, not just for taste, but performance. The meal became their final monologue. In 1893, William Kemmler, the first person executed by electric chair, reportedly had steak and eggs, toast, and coffee simple, almost brunch-like, a quiet middle finger to the machine that would fry his brain in less than a minute. And then you have the rare, bizarre choices that stick to your brain like overcooked rice. In 1918, German spy Karl Hans Lodi, executed by firing squad in the Tower of London, supposedly refused a final meal entirely, opting instead for a cup of strong black coffee. Just caffeine and silence, perhaps a final attempt to stay alert as he stared down the rifle barrels. One mainstream historical fact: the final meal was never globally standardized. France sometimes allowed family-prepared food, while Britain offered only what was available in the prison kitchen. In fact, the term last meal only gained cultural currency in the 20th century. Before that, it was often just supper, final only in hindsight. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. In 19th century Russia, some prisoners were offered a shot of vodka instead of a meal. Just one. Liquid courage distilled from potatoes and dread. The tradition faded by the 20th century, but left behind the dark joke that if the vodka didn't kill you, the Tsar's guards surely would. And there's one more case historians still debate. Did Tsar Nicholas II and his family eat a final dinner before their execution in 1918? Some accounts say they were served tea and stale bread. Others say the family was lulled into thinking they were being relocated, and nothing about that evening felt final. which makes it all the more chilling. You lean back, noticing a pattern now. Meals became mirrors. For some, a reflection of guilt. For others, nostalgia, or rebellion, or fear in a digestible form. Whether a grand feast or a spoonful of soup, each bite whispered something. And that whisper still lingers, long after the plate is cleared. Now, the years skip forward, and the plates grow heavier, greasier. Even you find yourself in a Texas prison in the late 20th century. The air smells like fried chicken and concrete. This is where the American tradition of extravagant last meals reached its strange, deep-fried peak. And where the phrase "you are what you eat" gets turned into a legal punchline. You're watching the kitchen staff prepare a tray, not just a tray, a production. 2 bacon cheeseburgers, a pint of mint chocolate chip ice cream, fried okra, a root beer, and a slab of pecan pie, untouched. Because the man who ordered it, Lawrence Russell Brewer, refused to eat any of it. It was 2011, and Texas lawmakers were so irritated by the waste that they ended the tradition of special last meals entirely. Since then, condemned inmates in Texas just get whatever's on the cafeteria menu. Because nothing says justice like lukewarm mystery meat. You would never think that a prisoner declining pie could trigger statewide policy change, but here we are. Historians still argue whether Brewer's refusal was a calculated protest or just a final joke. Either way, it ended the practice for everyone. The history of final meals in the United States is full of theatricality. Some prisoners lean into it, ordering excessive quantities, pounds of meat, buckets of chicken, stacks of pancakes. Others request something hauntingly simple. Victor Figuer, hanged in Iowa in 1963, asked for a single olive with the pit still inside. No salt, no garnish, no explanation. Just an olive, like a punctuation mark you're still trying to read. A mainstream historical fact: final meals are legally allowed in 36 U.S. states that retain the death penalty. But guidelines vary wildly. Some have dollar limits, some allow no substitutions, and others, like Texas, say, nope, you're getting whatever we made for everyone else. Institutional meatloaf as the final frontier of culinary democracy. Your quirky tidbit of the night serial killer, John Wayne Gacy, requested a dozen fried shrimp, a bucket of KFC original recipe chicken, French fries, and a pound of strawberries. Fun fact, he managed 3 KFC franchises before his arrest. So yes, even his execution was a franchise callback. But not every request is absurd. Timothy McVeigh, responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing, ordered 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. No entree, no dessert after dessert. Just cold sweetness that melts faster than history's forgiveness. And then there's the open debate. Do extravagant last meals provide comfort, closure, or just performative ritual? Some scholars argue it's a rare moment of dignity. Others see it as empty theater, one last illusion of choice in a process built to erase identity. You chew on that thought as you mentally trace the trays, some grand, some forgettable, and you begin to notice a truth no one likes to say aloud. Final meals aren't really about hunger. They're about memory, about staging a final, edible headline, about control in a system that leaves you none. And in a weird way, they're also about you, the one watching from the outside, deciding what kind of ending tastes right. Your fingers curl around another time-shifted tray, this one less American. More powdered wig and revolution. The scene changes to 1793 and you're in Paris. Not the city of lights, but the city of guillotines. The reign of terror has turned meal planning into existential dread. because the baker might sell you bread today and be headless tomorrow. Marie Antoinette, who probably didn't say let them eat cake, didn't get any cake either. Her final breakfast, a cup of weak broth, no croissants, no strawberries, just hot liquid barely worthy of royalty. And as she was marched toward the guillotine, she reportedly stepped on her executioner's foot and apologized. Because manners die hard even if everything else is about to. Historians still argue whether her apology was sincere or bitterly ironic. Either way, it's one of history's strangest footnotes. Picture it, you've been imprisoned, dethroned, publicly humiliated, and your final act is saying pardon to the guy who's about to separate your head from your neck. That's French etiquette at its most weaponized. And yet, the disparity between classes didn't always disappear at death. Some nobles were granted proper meals before execution, roasted fowl, wine, even dessert. Meanwhile, peasants in line for the blade might get nothing but stale bread, if they were lucky. Equality was the slogan, but hunger still picked favorites. You're reminded of Georges Danton, another figure, swallowed by the revolution he helped start. His last request? Wine, he said. Show my head to the people. It's worth seeing. Theatrical to the end like a tragic actor. Red curtain replaced by red stain. Meanwhile, executions became public entertainment. Vendors sold snacks at guillotine sites, sandwiches and cider while you watch someone's head bounce into a basket. You'd never think revolution could become a picnic, but here we are. History's most ironic lunch break. Mainstream fact during the French Revolution. Over 16,000 people were officially executed by guillotine, many of them in Paris's public squares. Fringe tidbit. The blade of the guillotine was angled because a flat one didn't always finish the job. Let that sharpen your appetite, and as you hover over another powdered face awaiting its final course, you notice the difference between performance and necessity in America. The last meal became theater. In revolutionary France, it was more like a whisper, because speaking too loudly might remind someone you were still around to eat. Sometimes the food was symbolic. Sometimes it was purely absent. And sometimes, like in the case of Louis XVI, it became part of a strange ritual. He ate roast chicken with wine, then confessed to a priest, then mounted the scaffold like a man stepping onto a stage. He died quietly, they say, but the crowd was loud. Food disappears fast when fear is louder. Now, your stomach churns slightly, not from hunger, but from the growing realization that death's menu is sometimes more dignified than life's. You tiptoe through history into the cold, calculated efficiency of 20th century prisons. Welcome to America's most macabre culinary tradition, the formalized last meal. The twist: this isn't some ancient relic. It's bureaucracy with mashed potatoes in the United States. Death row inmates are given the option of requesting a final meal before execution, a practice that's somehow both compassionate and absurd. You'd never think state-sanctioned killing would come with a side of fries. But here we are. Some states set a budget $20 in Florida, no limit in Texas until 2011. Others removed the ritual entirely, after someone ruined it for everyone by ordering a mountain of food and then refusing to eat it, which is either the ultimate power move or the pettiest hunger strike in history. Historians still argue whether this tradition is rooted in mercy, religious symbolism, or simply to offer inmates a strange illusion of control. Maybe it's none of the above. Maybe it's just the awkward human need to feed someone before snuffing them out. Eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow. You're scheduled at 7 p.m. sharp. Take Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. His final request: 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Chilling in every sense. A man responsible for the deaths of 168 people spent his final moments slowly melting a dessert. You don't know whether to be horrified or to marvel at how banal evil looks with a spoon. Then there's Victor Figuer, the last person executed in Iowa before the death penalty was abolished there. His request: a single olive with the pit still in it. Poetic, eerie, minimalist. After his execution, the pit was found in his pocket. Some believe it was meant to grow an olive tree from his grave. Others think it was just a final, quiet protest. Either way, it makes your last apple crumble feel deeply inadequate. The idea of comfort food turns into something else entirely when you know you won't digest it. Suddenly, ketchup is existential. Gravy is grief. One mainstream fact: Texas, the state with the highest execution count in the U.S., ended the last meal tradition in 2011 after a particularly excessive order went uneaten. Fringe tidbit: in some cases, when prisoners didn't choose a final meal, wardens would select a standard one on their behalf, usually fried chicken, mashed potatoes, peas, and pie. Institutional hospitality at its most unsettling. You imagine being asked, one final time, what would you like to eat, knowing the only thing you'd want is a way out? Or maybe something nostalgic, a burger from your childhood, your mother's soup, a peanut butter sandwich that reminds you of 4th grade. Because food, even then, isn't just food. It's memory on a plate. And memory, in those last hours, is the most dangerous indulgence of all. Now, you edge into even stranger territory, the curious theater of meals that were more performance than sustenance. For some condemned souls, the Last Supper wasn't about comfort or nostalgia. It was about sending a message. Consider Bruno Richard Hauptmann, convicted of kidnapping and killing the Lindbergh baby. His final meal was a mix of eggs, buttered toast, celery, and olives. Not exactly the dinner of a cartoon villain, but oddly clinical, like someone wanted their last moment to feel like lunch at a mildly depressing diner. Historians still argue whether Hauptmann was truly guilty or just railroaded by public outrage and shaky evidence, but the olives again make an appearance. Apparently, nothing says farewell to the world like briny garnish. Then there's Leon Czolgosz, the assassin of President William McKinley. His last meal, a slice of dry toast and a cup of weak coffee. No feast, no pageantry, just beige, which, given his anarchist beliefs, feels strangely fitting, a symbolic rejection of indulgence in a system he sought to destroy. You imagine him sipping his bitter drink, already mentally exiting the stage before the curtain even rose. And speaking of exits, you meet James French, a man with a flair for headlines, sentenced to death for murder. He made one final request, not for food, but for wit, as he faced the electric chair. His last words to the press were, "How's this for a headline? French fries?" His meal, not nearly as memorable. That's the thing. Sometimes it's not about the dish at all. It's about the punchline. One quirky tidbit. In Louisiana, it was tradition for the prison warden to dine with the inmate during their final meal. The logic being, no one should eat alone before dying. This tradition raises questions. Does the warden bring small talk? Do they comment on the gravy? Do they try not to think about tomorrow? And then you have Gary Gilmore, whose case inspired the phrase, "Just do it, yes." The Nike slogan. Before his execution in 1977, Gilmore declined a special last meal, asking only for a hamburger, hard-boiled eggs, and coffee Minimalist, brutalist, cold, but his final words, "Let's do it." Chilling, iconic, and later immortalized by a sneaker empire. You'd never think athletic branding could trace its lineage to a man facing a firing squad. Historians still argue whether last meals offer a humane pause or just mask institutional cruelty in ritual. Are these meals gestures of dignity or dark theatrics to make the final act go down smoother? When a man eats steak hours before his veins fill with poison, is it kindness or contradiction? Food is supposed to nourish life, not precede its end. And yet, the plate becomes a final stage, a symbol of everything that was, could have been, or never should have happened. In the end, even ketchup can become tragic. Now, you enter the realm of the extravagant, the symbolic, and perhaps inevitably the absurd, when the final meal becomes an act of rebellion, self-parody, or performance art. You start to wonder if the condemned are quietly winking at history. Take Victor Figuerer. His final request? A single olive, not a plate of them. Not an olive martini, just one, with the pit still in. He didn't eat it. He asked to be buried with it in his pocket. Why, no one really knows. Some say it symbolized peace or rebirth. Others think it was just beautifully weird. Historians still argue whether this was a spiritual gesture, an environmental prank, or simply Victor's way of saying, "You don't get to understand me." Now, contrast that minimalism with the unapologetic decadence of Ronnie Lee Gardner. Convicted of double homicide, Gardner requested lobster tail, steak, apple pie, and vanilla ice cream consumed while watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Yes, all 3 extended editions. That's over 11 hours of fantasy lore, swords, and hobbits before facing a firing squad. You probably wouldn't survive this emotionally forget the bullets. The real challenge is digesting surf and turf while Frodo's slowly melting in Mount Doom. And then there's Teresa Lewis, the only woman executed in the U.S. in 2002. Her final order: fried chicken, peas with butter, and Dr. Pepper. Sweet, southern, so normal it hurts. But there's something unsettling in that normalcy, like she was trying to cling to the ordinary in a world collapsing around her. That soda fizz might as well have been the last laughter in her throat. Meanwhile, some inmates declined their final meals entirely. Timothy McVeigh, responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing, requested 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. That's it. No protein, no starch, just the cold, sweet bite of something that melts away before you even swallow. It's hard to decide if that's haunting or strangely comforting. Ice cream doesn't ask for redemption, and if you were hoping this trend ends with time, it doesn't. In fact, in 2011, Texas stopped the practice of allowing final meal choices after 1 inmate. Lawrence Brewer ordered a towering list: 2 chicken fried steaks, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger, an omelet, fried okra, barbecue, half a loaf of bread, pizza, a pint of ice cream, and more, and then refused to eat any of it. The message: possibly trolling, possibly protest. Or maybe he just changed his mind. But the backlash ended a century-old tradition. Historians still argue whether Brewer ruined the ritual or merely exposed how bizarre it was to begin with. There's something poetic and absurd about a civilization that asks someone to choose a side of fries before lethal injection. A last indulgence in a world that's already taken everything else. It's dinner as diplomacy, steak as statement. You can't help but think, what would you order? What could possibly say, "This was me in one tray"? You arrive at the end, where the last meals become less about food and more about meaning, whether it's closure, legacy, or one final message for the living. Here, dinner isn't just dinner. It's part epitaph, part protest, and part performance in a theater where no one gets an encore. Let's talk about Bruno Richard Hauptmann, convicted of kidnapping the Lindbergh baby. His final meal included celery, olives, chicken, French fries, buttered peas, cherries, and layer cake. Not bad for a man about to face the electric chair. The real twist? He claimed innocence right to the end. So, did he savor every bite as a condemned man? Or eat like someone who truly believed the courts had made a terrible mistake? Historians still argue whether Hauptmann was guilty or merely the perfect scapegoat for a nation desperate for closure. Then there's Gary Gilmore, famous for saying, "Let's do it." Moments before facing a firing squad, his final meal was as blunt as his personality stake. Potatoes, milk, and coffee. That's the kind of dinner you have before fixing a fence. Not facing eternity. No flair. No metaphor. Just meat and caffeine. Because why not face the end like it's just another long day? You also get prisoners like Peter Curtin, the so-called vampire of Dusseldorf, who asked for Wiener Schnitzel, fried potatoes, and white wine. Then, right before his execution, he asked if he would still be able to hear the sound of his own blood gushing after decapitation. That's not something your average food critic would consider. You would never think that schnitzel and existential horror went so well together. But maybe the most gut-punching moment comes from the ones who ask for nothing. They simply refuse the ritual, not out of protest, but perhaps because even the comfort of food seems hollow. Maybe it's too little, too late. Maybe they're trying to leave with no trace. Or maybe, just maybe, they're already full of regret. It's not always dark. Some go out with humor. One inmate's final request was justice, equality, and world peace, which, ironically, were not available on the prison menu. Another asked for dirt, yes, actual dirt because of a belief in voodoo rituals. Officials politely declined and offered yogurt instead. It's not exactly a spiritual substitute. But hey, calcium's good for you. And as you sit with that, you realize the final meal isn't really about food. It's about storytelling. The story the condemned want to tell. Or, sometimes, the story they want to deny. A last chance to be human, or to confuse us one last time. You don't always get to choose how you live, but for a few bites, you might get to choose how you're remembered. And now, we slow down, gently. Your breathing evens out. The plates are cleared. The lights dim. The conversation has faded. You're left with only the quiet hum of history's absurd dinner table. And the curious comfort that even in our darkest moments, someone somewhere still asked, "Do you want dessert with that?"